There is a strange moment in modern relationships that nobody really talks about openly, but almost every woman has felt it. A man who once seemed fully present suddenly becomes slightly different. Not cold, not gone, not openly distant, but just different enough that your mind starts filling in the blanks. And in that silence, you start asking questions that don't have clear answers. Did I do something wrong? Is he losing interest? Or is this just how men are? But what if I told you that sometimes this is not confusion at all? It's not random behavior. It's not even distance in the way we assume it is. It's something quieter, something more psychological, something deeply rooted in how men process emotional attachment when they start to care. Because when a man begins to develop real feelings, he doesn't always move closer in obvious ways. Instead, he becomes observant. He studies without announcing it. He watches without making it dramatic. He starts to notice how you react when things are not perfect, how you handle silence, how you respond when he is not constantly giving attention. And in that process, he is not trying to play games. He is trying to understand emotional safety. This is where most women get caught off guard, because what feels like mixed signals is often something much more subtle: internal testing. Not manipulation, not control, but quiet emotional evaluation. He is not just asking himself, do I like her? He is asking deeper questions like, can I be myself around her? Will she stay emotionally steady when things are uncertain? Is this connection stable enough to trust? And once you understand this hidden layer of male behavior, everything starts to look different. The silence makes sense. The distance makes sense. Even the sudden changes in energy start to form a pattern. One of the most misunderstood moments in early emotional connection is when a man suddenly creates space. He may reply slower than usual, seem slightly less expressive, or become quieter without any clear reason. And for many women, this instantly triggers overthinking. The mind starts building stories. Did I say something wrong? Is he losing interest? Should I do something to fix this? But in reality, this moment is not always about loss of interest. It is often about emotional observation. A man who is starting to develop real feelings sometimes unconsciously steps back just enough to see how the connection behaves without constant fuel. Not because he wants to hurt you, but because he wants to understand the emotional stability of what is forming between you. In this distance phase, what he is really watching is not your words, but your emotional reaction. Do you immediately chase his attention? Do you become anxious and start filling the gap with excessive messaging or emotional pressure? Or do you stay calm, grounded, and still emotionally present without losing your balance? This difference is everything. Because from his perspective, attraction is not just about chemistry, it is about emotional safety. A man may enjoy attention, but he bonds deeply with stability. If your energy collapses the moment his presence becomes slightly inconsistent, he learns, without you even realizing, that the emotional environment feels unstable. But when you stay centered, something interesting happens. When you don't overreact, when you don't panic, when you don't force connection to feel secure, you communicate something powerful without saying a word. I am okay on my own, and I am still here without needing to chase. And that creates a completely different emotional response in him. Instead of feeling pressure, he feels space. Instead of feeling chased, he feels safe to return naturally. And ironically, that is what pulls him closer, not pushes him away. This test is not about playing games or pretending to be unaffected. It is about emotional regulation. A man who is genuinely interested is not looking for perfection. He is looking for consistency in your emotional presence. He wants to know if your energy remains stable even when his is not fully directed at you. Because real connection cannot survive constant emotional chaos. It needs grounding. It needs calmness. It needs a sense that both people are emotionally anchored, not reactive. And here is the deeper layer most people miss. When you do not panic during his distance, you are not just passing a test. You are changing the entire emotional dynamic. You are showing that your connection is not built on fear of loss, but on inner security. And that shifts how he sees you completely. You are no longer just someone he is interacting with. You become someone he feels naturally drawn back to, because being around you feels emotionally safe, not demanding. In the end, the distance test is not really about him pulling away. It is about whether you lose yourself when he does. And the strongest emotional attraction is often built not in constant closeness, but in the calm way you handle the space between. There is a point in almost every growing emotional connection where a man stops focusing only on the easy version of you, the laughter, the chemistry, the smooth conversations, and starts paying attention to something much deeper. How you respond when things are not perfectly aligned. This is what we can call the reaction test. It is not something he announces, and most of the time, he is not even fully aware he is doing it. But it happens naturally when feelings start to become real. Because attraction alone is simple. But emotional stability under pressure, that is what determines whether something can last. In this phase, he might create small moments of friction. It could be a slightly different opinion, a delayed response to something important, or even a playful disagreement that carries a bit of emotional weight. And what he is really observing is not the topic itself, but your inner control. Do you react quickly, emotionally, without thinking? Do you become defensive, trying to win or prove a point? Or do you stay centered, listen, and respond with calm confidence even when there is tension? This matters to him more than most women realize. Because when a man starts to care, he doesn't just want connection that feels exciting. He wants connection that feels emotionally safe. And safety is revealed in conflict, not in comfort. Anyone can be kind when everything is smooth. But not everyone can stay soft, grounded, and emotionally aware when there is even a small disruption. If your reaction is explosive or overly emotional, he may not pull away immediately, but internally, he starts categorizing the connection as unpredictable. Not bad, not wrong, just emotionally unstable. And instability creates hesitation and deeper emotional investment. But if your reaction is steady, thoughtful, and balanced even when you disagree, it creates a very different emotional signal. It tells him that being around you does not feel like walking on emotional eggshells. It feels safe. It feels mature. It feels real. And here is something important. This test is not about suppressing your emotions or pretending to be unaffected. It is not about being cold or overly controlled. In fact, emotional expression is still important, but what he is really drawn to is emotional regulation, the ability to feel something strongly without losing yourself in it, to express without destroying connection, to disagree without disconnecting emotionally. When a woman passes this kind of moment, naturally, something shifts in his perception. He starts to see her not just as someone he is attracted to, but someone he can trust during emotional tension. And trust, in male psychology, is what deepens attachment far more than attraction alone, because attraction makes him approach, but emotional safety makes him stay. There is also another layer most people don't notice. When a man sees that you can handle emotional pressure without overreacting, he becomes more open himself. He starts to relax. He starts to show more of his real thoughts, not just the polished version. Because deep down, he begins to feel that he doesn't have to carefully manage every word to avoid emotional fallout. And that is when real intimacy begins, not in perfection, but in emotional honesty. So the reaction test is not really about how you respond to a single moment. It is about what your response communicates about your emotional world. Are you reactive or are you steady? Are you driven by emotion alone, or do you also carry awareness in how you express it? Because in the end, the men who are truly falling in love are not just looking for excitement. They are looking for someone whose presence feels emotionally safe, even when things are not perfect. When a man starts developing deeper feelings, one of the quiet things he begins to look for is not just how you act in the best moments, but whether your energy stays the same across different moods, situations, and emotional states. This is what we can call the consistency test. It is not about perfection. It is about emotional authenticity. Because attraction might begin with excitement, but emotional attachment is built on something much more stable. Predictability in your core personality. Even when life is not predictable, at the beginning of a connection, everything usually feels light and effortless. Conversations flow, emotions feel high, and both people naturally show their most engaging side. But as feelings start to grow, a man slowly becomes more observant. He starts to notice patterns. He begins to ask himself, not directly but internally, is this how she really is, or is this just her best version? Because what he is looking for is not a performance. It is the real person behind the moments of effort. In this phase, he watches how you behave when you are happy compared to when you are slightly stressed or distracted. He notices whether your kindness remains the same when you are not receiving constant attention. He observes whether your tone changes drastically depending on his availability or emotional energy. And without making it obvious, he is building a mental picture of your emotional consistency. A woman who is consistent in her emotional expression sends a very strong signal. This is who I am, not who I become based on circumstances. And that kind of energy feels grounding to a man who is starting to feel something deeper. Because inconsistency, even if unintentional, creates emotional uncertainty. If someone feels warm one day and distant the next without any clear reason, it becomes difficult to fully relax into the connection. But consistency does not mean being the same in a robotic or forced way. It does not mean hiding emotions or pretending everything is always fine. In fact, emotional honesty is still very important. The difference lies in how your core energy remains stable even when your mood changes. You can be upset but still respectful. You can be busy but still considerate. You can be less available but still emotionally clear. That is what creates trust. When a man sees that your personality does not shift dramatically based on external validation or attention, something subtle happens inside him. He starts to feel that what he is experiencing is real, not situational. You are not just nice when things are going well. You are steady even when things are normal, quiet, or slightly imperfect. And that stability builds emotional confidence in the connection. There is also a deeper psychological layer here. Consistency reduces emotional guessing, and when a man doesn't have to constantly decode your behavior or wonder what version of you he will get, his mind relaxes. And when the mind relaxes, emotional attachment becomes easier. Because he no longer feels like he is navigating unpredictability, he feels like he is understanding someone real. Over time, this creates a powerful effect. Instead of excitement fading into confusion, it transforms into trust. And trust is what makes a man emotionally invest without hesitation, not because everything is perfect, but because your presence feels familiar, steady, and real. So the consistency test is not about being flawless or emotionally flat. It is about whether your emotional identity stays recognizable across different moments, because in the end, a man who is falling in love is not just looking for someone interesting. He is looking for someone real enough that he doesn't have to keep questioning who they are every time the emotional weather changes. As a connection starts to grow, something subtle happens in a man's mind. He doesn't just look at how much you like him. He starts noticing how much of your world he becomes. And this is where the availability test quietly comes in. It is not about checking if you are free all the time or constantly reachable. It is about understanding whether your life continues to exist fully with or without his presence in a given moment. At first, attention feels exciting for both sides. Messages come fast, replies feel natural, and there is a rhythm that builds momentum. But when feelings start to deepen, a man begins to observe something more important than responsiveness. He starts observing identity. Does your life pause when he is not around? Or does your world keep moving forward with purpose, focus, and structure, even when he is not actively part of it? If a woman becomes too emotionally available too quickly, meaning she drops everything to respond, reshapes her routine around his attention, or emotionally centers her day on his presence, it can create a hidden pressure in the dynamic. Not because attention is wrong, but because imbalance starts to form. A man may enjoy being important in your life, but he does not want to feel like he is the entire structure of it. That kind of emotional weight can actually create distance instead of closeness. What he is really looking for in this phase is balance. He wants to see that you have your own direction, your own focus, your own rhythm that does not depend on his constant engagement. When you are busy, not in a performative way, but in a real-life way, work, goals, family, personal space, growth, it sends a quiet message. My life is complete with or without constant attention. And that is deeply attractive in a grounded, mature way, because from his perspective, a woman who is always available can sometimes feel emotionally easy, but not necessarily emotionally strong. And a man who is falling in love is not just looking for ease. He is looking for someone whose presence feels valuable, not replaceable. And value often increases when it is clear that your attention is something you give, not something you depend on giving. There is also a psychological shift that happens when you maintain your own life. It creates space for anticipation. When everything is instantly available, emotional intensity can flatten over time. But when your attention has rhythm, when sometimes you are present and sometimes you are fully engaged in your own world, it creates natural emotional breathing space. And in that space, curiosity grows. Importantly, this is not about playing hard to get or intentionally ignoring someone. It is not about calculated distance. It is about genuine self-direction. A woman who is emotionally healthy does not abandon her life to maintain connection. She integrates connection into her life without losing her structure. And that difference is felt even if it is not consciously analyzed. When a man sees that your world does not shrink around him, something shifts in how he values you. He starts to realize that being part of your life is not automatic. It is something that fits into a life that already has meaning, direction, and movement. And that creates a deeper form of attraction because it is no longer about access. It is about inclusion. In the end, the availability test is not about how often you are present. It is about whether your presence feels like a choice, not a need. Because men who are genuinely falling in love are not drawn to women who revolve around them. They are drawn to women whose lives are already full and who allow them to be part of that fullness, not the source of it. As a man starts to develop real feelings, there comes a point where light conversations and everyday humor are no longer enough to hold his interest on a deeper level. The connection naturally begins to shift from surface level interaction to something more meaningful, and this is where the emotional depth test quietly begins. It is not something he announces or explains. It happens through subtle moments when he starts opening small windows into his inner world. His thoughts, his fears, his doubts, or even things he normally doesn't talk about with others. In these moments, he is not just sharing information. He is offering emotional access. And what he is really trying to understand is simple but powerful. Can I be real here without being misunderstood? Because emotional depth for a man is not just about talking, it is about feeling safe while being seen. Many women miss this moment because they stay in the comfortable space of light conversation. Smiles, jokes, daily updates, and playful energy are important in building attraction, but they are not enough to build emotional attachment. When a man slowly shifts into deeper expression, he is unconsciously testing whether the emotional space between you can hold something more honest, more human, and more vulnerable. He might say something slightly personal, something uncertain about his life, or even something that shows emotional contradiction. And in that moment, he is not looking for advice or correction. He is looking for understanding. He is observing how you respond when the conversation is no longer polished or easy. Do you stay present with him emotionally, or do you quickly shift back to surface level responses because depth feels uncomfortable? If the response he receives feels judgmental, dismissive, or overly analytical, he will naturally pull that part of himself back. Not because he doesn't trust you at all, but because emotional safety has not been established in that layer of connection. But when he feels heard without being judged, when his thoughts are received with calm attention instead of pressure or correction, something very important happens inside him. He starts to associate your presence with emotional relief. Not excitement, not performance, but relief. And that is a powerful shift because relief is what makes someone return emotionally again and again. There's also a deeper layer here that most people overlook. When a man shares something personal and you respond with emotional maturity, meaning you don't rush to fix him, you don't overreact, and you don't make it about yourself. You create space for emotional expansion. He begins to feel that he can show more of himself without losing control of how he is perceived, and that freedom is rare. Over time, This builds something that attraction alone cannot create: emotional trust. And emotional trust is what allows a man to move from casual interest into deeper attachment, because he no longer feels like he has to filter himself too much to be accepted. The emotional depth test is not about having perfect answers or saying the right thing. It is about your ability to stay emotionally present when the conversation becomes real. It is about whether you can sit with vulnerability without turning it into discomfort or distance. Because in the end, a man who is falling in love is not just looking for someone who makes life fun. He is looking for someone who can hold space for the parts of him that are not always easy to express. At the end of the day, what really shapes a man's deeper emotional interest is not confusion, mixed signals, or mysterious behavior. It is how safe the connection feels when things are not perfect. Every test we talked about is not about tricks or games. It is simply how emotional awareness shows up when someone starts to care. And once you see it from this angle, you stop taking every small change personally. You stop overreacting to silence, delays, or emotional shifts because you understand the deeper pattern behind them. But here is the real truth that changes everything. You are not supposed to pass these moments by becoming someone else. You don't win emotional depth by chasing harder, reacting faster, or proving your worth. You actually build stronger connection when you stay grounded in who you are, calm, self-aware, and emotionally steady even when things feel uncertain. That is what creates real attraction that doesn't burn out quickly. And maybe the most important shift is this: you start focusing less on decoding him and more on understanding your own emotional center. Because when you are stable within yourself, you naturally attract people who respond